everybody, this is Neil Pasricha, and welcome back to chapter 28 of 3 books. Yes, we are doing 333 chapters total for 1,000 books total from 2018 all the way up to 2031, and every single conversation we have is adding 3 more books to our top 1,000, our human-created list of what we think will be the 1,000 most formative books in the world. We are reaching near and far, high and low, searching for people, adding something beautiful to the world to tell us which 3 books most shaped their lives. We've been all the way down to Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, where in Chapter 3 we sat down with Seth Godin in his studio, his incredibly interesting studio, where he talked about books such as the Book of Est by Luke Reinhardt. We had an amazing conversation about that. We've gone all the way over to Washington, D.C., where we've sat down in the reading room of Carrie Colin, famed editor of books such as A Stolen Life, Girl Boss, Lion, and even my own The Happiness Equation. And she talked to us about books such as The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. We've gone all the way up back home to my hometown of Toronto, Canada, where we met up with Angie Thomas, author of The Hate You Give and On the Come Up. We've talked to her about which 3 books most shaped her life. She said, I was a girl in Jackson, Mississippi, and you know what? I read this book, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, about a little black girl in Jackson, Mississippi, and I'm like, I can be the hero of the story. And she talked about how that sort of formed her opinion of seeing herself as a protagonist and as an author. And so keeping up our theme of meeting in cramped and busy hotels, for this chapter, chapter 28, I'm really excited to take you inside the Drake Hotel in downtown Toronto on Queen Street West, where I was lucky enough to meet up and sit down with Mark Manson. Who is Mark Manson? Well, I first got my introduction to Mark way back in September 2013 when I was reading one of my favorite blogs, which is raptitude.com, Getting Better at Being Human. And he had David Kane as the author of that blog. Hopefully he'll be a future guest on 3 books. And he linked over to this guy I never heard of, Mark Manson. And the thing you notice right away when you read markmanson.net, when you read his website, is, oh my gosh, this guy swears so much, and yet the cussing is just a way into these incredibly big thoughts. Because what he's doing on this blog is distilling down huge, gigantic philosophies around relationships, around how we treat ourselves, around anxiety, around essentially improving ourselves. But he's doing so in this really accessible way, like the way like a sharp friend would talk to you at 3 a.m. on someone's driveway. It's not just me, though, of course. Mark has actually put out a book. You might have heard of it. It came out in 2016. It's called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And at the time of this recording, it has now sold over 6 million copies. And I'm not kidding. Every time I check the number, it's like 1 million copies, 2 million copies. I mean, 6 million books it's sold as of today, and it's only been out 3 years. That is an incredibly astounding figure. Not one to rest on his laurels, though. At the time of this release, right, chapter 28 is coming out on the exact minute of the new moon in May 2019. By the way, every single chapter of the show comes out on the exact minute of the full moon or new moon, and the reason is because we don't trust that stupid Gregorian calendar. Nobody knows how many days February has. We got to go up to the sky. The clock for this podcast is up in the sky, people. Look up to the moon and you will know when the show's coming out. But just as we release this chapter, Mark is putting out his 2nd book. The world is waiting with bated breath. I am lucky enough to have gotten an advance copy. If you thought the first book, The Subtle Art, took giant topics and distilled them down, well, just watch out, because this new book, which is called Everything is Fucked, A Book About Hope, is like a whammo. It's just a whammo to your brain. In the first book, what they wrote is, in this generation-defining self-help guide, a superstar blogger cuts through the crap to show us how to stop trying to be positive all the time so we can become better and happier people. Right? Okay, that's fine. You're saying that's good. Now, in the 2nd book, Mark's 2nd book, which, by the way, I can't wait to tell you about his 3rd book, but in the 2nd book, which is called Everything is Fucked, A Book About Hope, the way they've described this book is really interesting. They say, here's the publisher's notes. They say, Mark Manson turns his gaze from the inevitable flaws within each individual self to the endless calamities taking place in the world around us. Drawing from a pool of psychological research on these topics, as well as the timeless wisdom of philosophers such as Plato, Nietzsche, and Tom Waits, he dissects religion, politics, and the uncomfortable ways they have come to resemble one another. He looks at our relationships with money, entertainment, and the internet, and how too much of a good thing can psychologically eat us alive. He openly defies our definitions of faith, happiness, freedom, and even hope itself. Yes, I'm talking about Mark's new book, which is called Everything is Fucked, a book about hope. Check it out. It is coming out just around the time of this podcast drop. And remember I hinted, I gotta tell you about his third book too. For his third book, which I think is still scheduled for this year, if not, it'll be early next year, Mark is teaming up with Will Smith, the Will Smith, to write Will Smith's memoir. And in this chapter of 3 books, he lets us kind of go there and talks about how he met up with Will Smith, what kind of limits and rules he placed on Will and Will's team before he agreed to write for him. He also talks about which book finally got through to him when he was a kind of a rambling teenager, not listening to his parents, not listening to his teachers, getting C's and D's, kind of loafing around. But then there was a book that sort of smacked his brain around, and he talks about that book today. He talks about building trust with millions of readers. Like 3 books, markmanson.net, his home online, also has no ads, no sponsors, no promotions. He's trying to go direct from himself to his readers. That's what we try to do on 3 books. No ads, no sponsors, no promotions, no interruptions, nothing. But what else is he doing? Well, the swearing is part of it, and he talks about that, but there's other things he's doing to build and engender trust. That is so important in the world today. Now, here's the interesting thing he talks about. Now that he's kind of made it, 6 million books will be called making it in this world. He's been poo-pooing self-help gurus like his whole life. Like he's like, I'm not self-help. I hate self-help. Well, like what's on his not-to-do list now? You know? What is on his not-to-do list? So these are just some of the themes we get into. Mark, as you may or may not have guessed, has contributed the most number of pages of any guest so far on 3 books. These are coming in heavy, these books. But he was nice enough to invite me down to his hotel room at the Drake Hotel in downtown Toronto. By the way, the Drake Hotel, for those that don't know, is like a really small hotel. It's like a really trendy hotel. The bottom is like a loud, popular bar. There's rumors in Toronto that like Drake, the rapper, kind of lifted his name from that bar, although I think he says it's based on his grandfather's name. But the bar was really popular even before Drake was really popular. And it kind of put its stamp on this gentrifying neighborhood just west of the downtown core. And so I stand at the bottom of the lobby. I've never actually been up to one of the hotel rooms. Mark comes down the stairs. He's in bare feet. And I'm like, I like how you made yourself at home here. He's like, dude, I'm just from Texas. So we amble up the stairs, go into his hotel room. As is often the case in these small, trendy boutique hotels, there's like nothing in his room except for a bed. It's like just a bed. And there's like, I don't know, 6 inches on every side of the bed. And then there's a toilet and a sink like within arm's reach. So there's no other choice. There's no possible other seating arrangement than Mark and I, essentially me sitting on one corner of his bed, him kind of leaning against the other corner, setting up the microphone. So it's a cramped and fun conversation with a guy who I have so much respect for. Look at what he's doing to distill big themes and topics to helping people live great lives today. Please, please, please join me in welcoming Mark Manson into chapter 28 of 3 books. Let's go. Okay, test. We're live. We're live. Mark, thank you so much for doing 3 books.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having.
And I apologize that the 3 most powerful books of my life were all like 1,000 pages long.
Well, you don't even know. You don't even know. But I actually did a word count. Like I'm going to talk about that because I did a page count, and you actually have taken the crown.
Wow.
For the person who's been on 3 books who has the most pages so far. Previous crown was held by Chris Anderson, head of TED, who had 1,378 pages.
I smashed that.
Yeah, I smashed. I mean, he had Steven Pinker, David Deutsch, like some big hitters, Jacqueline Novogratz, of course. But you come in. You wallop him with 2,543 pages.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
this is excessive.
So yeah, I won't reveal the titles just yet so that the listener his interest can be piqued. But we got 1,079 pages, followed by 1,088 pages. Hilarious, those 2 books are only like 9 pages apart, and then a 376 page, kind of picture book to close things off. But I was just gonna say thank you, because I'm sitting right now in your hotel room. I mean, we had attempted to get together in New York, and you were kind enough to let me know when you came through Toronto. So I'm sitting here in the Drake Hotel, downtown Toronto, my hometown, and I'm just so thrilled to be able to do this in Toronto. So thanks so much for coming through the city, and also staying in what is definitely known as the coolest hotel in town.
It's pretty hip. These light fixtures are they're next level.
But of course, in exchange for all the hipness, you lose square
It's tiny.
footage. Yeah, I'm sitting. So people can't see us, but I'm sitting on your bed. You've like pulled up a little chair on the side of, like, you've got the mics down in the corner of the bed. I think the shower, the sink, the toilet are all within like touching distance of us.
Yes.
So this is like we're giving the New York experience. So with all that said, I thought we could go back to your first, book. And I say go back because as I understand it, you read it at age 19. But I'm going to do a 30-second overview, then hand the mic over to you completely.
Okay.
I'm introducing Atlas Shrugged, your first book, Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. Copyright 1957 by Random House. The back says, peopled by larger-than-life heroes and villains, charged with towering questions of good and evil, Atlas Shrugged is Ayn Rand's magnum opus, a philosophical revolution told in the form of an action thriller. Nominated as one of America's best-loved novels by PBS, Atlas Shrugged is a modern classic with Rand's most extensive statement of objectivism, her groundbreaking laissez-faire capitalist philosophy. Mark Manson, tell us about your relationship with Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand.
This is, let's stick with the analogy of comparing books to like dating. This is the ex-girlfriend that I can't believe I fell in love with. But it's also incredibly important to my life. Like, so Rand makes me cringe. I think she's kind of a cheesy writer. I think her books are overlong. I think her political philosophy is a cartoon, basically. But I read this book when it was like, I think it was summer between my freshman year and sophomore year. And it changed my life, like completely changed my life. And I think what I got from it, and this is what I get a lot of emails from people about Rand, because she's hugely popular. And at least, I don't know about here in Canada, but in the States, she's politically a pretty prominent figure on the right.
Yeah. It's like Ayn Rand is Donald Trump. Fountainhead is Donald Trump's favorite book. I think it's House Speaker. It's his favorite book. If you go through the Republican, a lot of these prominent guys say, Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead is their favorite book.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've always been on the left side of the political spectrum, so I get a lot of emails about Rand, and should I read her? What do you think about her? Things like that. And here's kind of like where I've landed with her. I think if you take her message as a message of personal empowerment, personal responsibility, I think it's incredibly powerful. I think her work is unbelievably powerful. I think as a political philosophy, it's pretty shallow and weak. But so the way it had that effect on me. So to give a little bit of background, when I was a teenager, I was a slacker. I was a stoner. I was that kid who was like sleeping in the back of class and would like cut class to like go smoke cigarettes out back. I was like barely passing. And I was just this kind of like lazy, rich, entitled kid who didn't want to do anything, didn't want to take responsibility for anything. And I ended up going to music school, and I had a really rough time. I spent most of my freshman year kind of like struggling a lot, and it was first time I was on my own. I was actually like responsible for myself, and surprise, surprise, life is difficult. So reality kind of hit me in a very uncomfortable way, and reading Rand was like exactly what I needed. She basically makes a moral argument against laziness. She says that we all have this short time on the planet, and if you are not using that in some productive way, that is a moral issue. And it shocked me, like, because I had heard all this stuff like, oh, well, you should try hard, you should care about yourself, and you should, you're underachieving and you have potential and blah, blah, blah. And Rand was like, no, you're a bad human. Like, you're sitting around smoking pot all day. It makes you a bad human because you're not contributing to humanity, because like life is difficult for everybody and you need to get your shit together. And it was, yeah.
You're a looter.
Yes, a leech, a free rider. And man, like it was basically the lecture that my parents and all my teachers had always tried to give me. She successfully gave me.
Wow.
And so I got my shit together. I started studying. I started doing well in school. I started reading all the, like, studying stuff on my own, like buying all these books and studying different topics on my own. I started going out. I got a part-time job. I quit smoking pot. Like all that stuff happened within 6 months or so.
Wow. How did the book get into your hands? Like, how did someone, as you describe, who is, as you said, kind of unmotivated, sort of read 1,000-page? Like, I just couldn't hand this to someone who was kind of like, lazy. They have to read 1,000-page book.
I'm trying to remember. So, I mean, I always had I had a kind of an autodidactic streak, like I was really obnoxious when I was a teenager. I would go to class and I would bring a book that was not assigned, like completely unrelated to anything in school. I would bring it and I would like read in class. And so teachers didn't know what to do because they're like, well, at least he's reading, but he's reading something that has nothing to do with anything.
A critique of pure reason. This isn't the beach.
Yeah, but so I think I probably a college friend or something.
But you describe it as kind of like this, like I'm picturing like Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah.
Like a sort of a disrespectful of authority, but obviously like very intelligent and like passionate about lots of things, creative. Yes. Interesting. So this really kind of set you on, like it pushed you in a positive way.
Yeah.
And I'm going through this book kind of like, in preparation for chatting with you. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, you can pass that back for me for a second. Sure. I don't know if you noticed, Mark, but like in the very center of this book, and this is really common in all of Ayn Rand's books, there's actually like a little card.
Yeah.
And it says like, if the ideas, so there's like this postcard kind of in the middle of the book. It says, if the ideas expressed in this book interest you, you can discover their application through a subscription to the Ayn Rand letter, a personal fortnightly communication from Ayn Rand. The letter, I'm like, it's like one year, it's like $38. Here's your name. And I'm like, wow. I'm like, this is 1957. She's building a list. She's building a list.
She built an institute.
She's building an institute, she's building a community around her ideas.
Yeah. So what's funny is, so Atlas Shrugged kind of blew my mind open. I read The Fountainhead soon after. I tried to read some of her nonfiction stuff, didn't really get into it. And then I kind of forgot about her for a while. And then I came back to her. She had a really fascinating life. So, Nathaniel Branden, Six Pillars of Self-Esteem. So I read his work and really dug it. And
so you made a jump there that I said yeah to, but can you pause? So that is her.
So Nathaniel Branden was her lover. So she was married to another guy.
Her husband.
Yes.
Right.
And he was like 20 years younger than her.
And he was a fan of her work, I think, right? Was that not?
He was a close friend. Yeah, he was like an early supporter and close friend and fan. I think he was actually like helped start her institute. But anyway, she had this crazy life story. And so it was fascinating. So I guess what my point is that when I discovered her, it really changed things for me. It was huge. Like it was a huge positive effect on my life. And then as that effect wore off, I kind of soured on her. But then I came back maybe 6 or 7 years later and I saw like, she's such a fascinating person. Once you kind of like get away from the politics and get away from like the personal feelings and everything, like she's just such a,
how so?
She had this crazy life. Like she had this like almost this like commune of people in New York City. So like in Atlas Shrugged, she writes about how, spoiler alert, but like all the smartest and most capable people in society run off to the mountains and start their own little
Gulch.
yes, they start their own little utopia. Well, she had a group in New York that were like basically these insanely brilliant, like Alan Greenspan was in her circle, Brandon was in her circle, Barbara Brandon was in her circle, like all these like major figures of the social sciences and the intellectual movements of like the 60s and 70s were like all close friends of hers, and they used to all get together and like hang out together, and then found out that they were like sexually involved with each other and open marriages and all this crazy stuff going on. um and she was very much the figure in the center of all of that, who kind of pushed it and promoted it. And she was trying to create her own little Galt's Gulch. It ultimately failed spectacularly, and she ended up dying alone and like pretty cranky, from what I understand. So it's just this. It's a really. She tried to live out Atlas Shrugged, and it backfired big time. And so I always found that fascinating. The other thing I'll mention really quick, that I found really fascinating, or I guess I kind of came back and I admired a lot about her. I saw randomly on YouTube, I saw an interview of her in like 1959 or something. And she's sitting there, like it's like a 60 minutes interview or something. She's sitting there smoking a cigarette on air, like chain smoking on air. And the guy's asking him all these questions about Atlas Shrugged and all this. And then the guy asks, he says, well, how does God figure into this? And she's like, what is, in her like thick Russian accent, she's like, what is this God? God is stupid. Nobody should believe in God. And like, this is like 1959, like this is back when like that would get you excommunicated from society. And she just, no hesitation.
Talk about she's very bold, very courageous, very strong on her points of view.
Yeah.
And like your writing, I think, Mark, is able to build trust with people, regardless of what you think of her writing. It's like, I mentioned the thing in the middle, right? You've got a lot of people following your work. And we live right now in society where trust is very low.
Yes.
Okay, by anyone's stretch of the imagination, trust in business, trust in media, trust in government, all very, 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 very low. You have built a tremendous amount of trust around your work and your writing.
Yeah.
I believe she did the same thing back in the day.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was going to ask you, not to parallel yourself with her in any way, but like, how do you do that today? What are the ingredients to building trust with an audience today? Because it's everyone's BS meter so finely attuned. We don't trust or believe anything.
Yeah.
People think the world is flat now, right? I think I heard you. I think I heard you say that. I think I heard you say that in some other interview, and it's like, but yet you've done it, and so did she. And objectivist society still exists across all kinds of college campuses. Her books are still selling like fireworks. How do you build trust today?
I think, in my own work, I think it's a combination. So I think the thing that I have in common with her is, I think if you can kind of snap people out of their haze, kind of get them to have a breakthrough in perspective in their own life, that generates a tremendous amount of goodwill towards you. Ultimately, that's kind of like how a lot of cults and stuff are started. Is they take people in a desperate situation, they kind of snap them out of it. And then once you do that, you have this person has all this goodwill towards you. They trust you, they respect you, they admire you. And then that is a power that you have to be very careful wielding. And I think people who wield it towards self-gratification, or they just try to cash in really quick, they destroy it. They build all this goodwill through their work, and then they try to make a shitload of money, or they try to start a commune somewhere. And
very tempting things.
And they destroy it. And so, I was very into the self-help world when I was younger, and I became very disillusioned with it. And so since I've become kind of blown up and everything, I've been very, very conscious of like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to violate that trust in any way, and I want to be very like transparent about who I am and what I'm doing. And so I think when you do that, it just keeps that trust going.
Yeah, there's two things there. One is like getting that original, that initial breakthrough in perspective. You when you said it, you made it sound easy. Easy. Oh yeah, just break through their perspective. It's a piece of cake. Well, like that to me is that to me it's like we live in this cluttered world. Like, how do you actually do that? What is it that how do you come through the clutter?
Well, I think one thing that served me very well is actually the profanity, and I get criticized for it all the time. But I've actually I wrote on my website. I wrote an article a few years ago called "Why I Have a Potty Mouth."
I remember reading it,
and it's a very detailed explanation of the thought process and the strategy behind it. Because profanity within language, profanity exists for a very specific reason. It's designed. Basically, we take this basket of words, and we all decide as a culture that these are bad, shameful, dirty things, and speaking into like I guess sociologically or whatever, the purpose of those words is to kind of like put a fence around, okay, this is what we accept as a society, and that's what we don't accept.
Right.
Those things are dangerous. Those things are evil. And so a side effect of that is that those words grab attention much more than anything else does. And not only do they grab attention, but they kind of like shock you into like, it's kind of like getting slapped in the face. Like you don't, there's no pretensions or it kind of interrupts all the scripts going on in your head. And so the example I use in the article is that there was this great piece that I read by a U.S. military veteran talking about PTSD, and he said, or talking about trauma, basically. And this is a guy who's like, been shot at, has burn scars on his face, like all this stuff. And he finished the article. He said, "Fuck your trauma." And it's just like so shocking and powerful the way he wrote it, and that you're like, yeah, fuck my trauma. Like,
fuck your trauma. I have more.
No. Just the
fact, or just to say like.
No, he's saying like we all have trauma. So fuck it.
Yeah.
Like your trauma only stops you as much as you let it.
Gotcha.
Fuck it.
Yeah.
Like, and I remember reading that.
Just how visceral that was.
And just being like, God, that's so powerful. And I realized, I'm like, yeah, that is what profanity does, is it snaps you out of these kind of scripts. Because the typical, the context we expect to find, a discussion of trauma is like, okay, well, we all come from difficult backgrounds, and some people are hurt more than others, and we have to listen to our feelings. And it's like, no, fuck your trauma.
Yeah.
And it completely snaps you into this new, different place.
That's amazing. It's such a great, and you, I think, I'm sure it's like since your book came out, Subtle Art Not Giving a Fuck, it's like you can't find a book without the F word on the cover now. It's like you just broke into new territory, but you built that trust. You have there's so much goodwill. At first in the gate, I'm sure you had to. I can't imagine the meetings you must have had on debating that the F word on the cover. I mean, I can only imagine. And I know there's a version of your book that has even it blocked off on the cover.
All of it, yeah.
Right? So that's one way to build trust. Anything else? I mean, anything else you think of? And I'm interested in this topic because I'm studying kind of how we build trust in an era when we are not trusting of each other.
Yeah.
And one area that I thought of for you, and I don't know if this is a choice that you've made consciously or just was automatic or whatever, but like you got no ads.
Yeah.
That's like just something I always noticed and appreciated. Your blog looks beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just clean. It's crisp. And almost no one else I can think of, from the New York Times to other people's blogs to other people's I'm like I went on the record on my first episode of saying like no ads on this show ever. I just hate ads. You have tremendous traffic.
Yeah.
What's the idea with no ad? Is that a trust thing for you, or is it just like I never got around to it, or what happened there?
No, it's definitely part of it's a trust thing.
Okay. Tell me more.
Part of it's a trust thing. Part of it is that I myself hate ads. Part of it is that I think the advertising business model is one of the problems with the internet. It's the advertising model is what drives clickbait. It's what drives spam. It's what drives
misinformation,
all the outrage porn, fake news, everything. And so I think I think it's a huge problem. And as somebody, I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I can publish independently. I'm not relying on some institution or some publication to support me. Um, so yeah, I chose to just go straight to my readers and be like, look, like, let's keep the site ad free. Let's keep everything transparent. I'll communicate directly with you, tell you everything that's going on. There'll be no pretenses, but it's like, you got to give a few bucks. And it's worked out great. It's been amazing.
How refreshing. That's so refreshing and so rare. Because I think I've studied this a little bit, and the place my limited Googling goes to is like the Jay-Z kind of propagation of like the hustle hard, that mentality sort of, it reversed the old adage of he's selling out into he's hustling hard.
Right.
You see, like that whole, like, bands didn't used to want their songs in car commercials.
Yeah.
And it went the other way. Yeah. It's like you couldn't see a car commercial without like a Rolling Stones song on it or a Flaming Lips song, when that used to be the opposite of what they wanted.
Yeah.
And I almost was curious, like I hope there's I hope that comes back.
Yeah, I do too. I do too.
Okay. If you do want to sponsor, no, I'm just kidding.
Now we'll take
now let me tell
you
a brief
message from
my sweat whisking underwear. Okay, so let's move on. Can we move on to your second book? This is great. I wanted to kind of get into a little bit with Ayn Rand. So I think I think you want to go to this one next, right? This is the next book in your list. I was tapping it here. Okay, so we're going to go over to your second book, Mark, which is A Brief History of Everything by Ken Wilber, published by Shambhala Press in 1997. The summary is: join one of the greatest contemporary philosophers on a breathtaking tour of time and the cosmos, from the Big Bang right up to the eve of the 21st century. This accessible and entertaining summary of Ken Wilber's greatest ideas has been expanding minds for over 2 decades, providing a kind of unified field theory of the universe and treating a host of issues related to that universe, from gender roles to multiculturalism to environmentalism and even the meaning of the internet. A Brief History of Everything by Ken Wilber may well be the best introduction to the thoughts of the man who has been called the Einstein of consciousness. Tell us about your relationship with A Brief History of Everything by Ken Wilber.
So about a year after I read Atlas Shrugged, and I kind of got on this whole, I got my life together, and I got, I started working hard and studying hard and everything. I came across Ken, and Ken was like my guy basically through all my early 20s. I'm not gonna say obsessed with this guy, but like I read every single book he wrote. I followed him online. I watched every interview, and Ken's a pretty special person. I'll put it out there that I don't agree with everything he says or did at this point in my life, but at the time he was so impactful for me. So here's Ken's whole project. He's basically, his background was he was a PhD student in biology who got really into Zen Buddhism. And about halfway through his PhD, he said, you know what, screw this. I'm going to go stare at a wall for the next 10 years.
He actually said, and I think he actually said that, right?
And he actually did. Yeah. He actually like went and sat in a room and stared at a wall for, I think, like 4 or 5 years. He got really into the meditation thing, Eastern spirituality. Like, he is just a big brain dude. And he had a very deep understanding of, I guess, the scientific world, the Western history and knowledge. And then he spent, the next 5 or 10 years just getting very deep into the Eastern philosophy and spiritual world. And then he came back from all this, and he kind of made it his project of like, he's like, I want to marry the two, science and spirituality, or religion and philosophy and everything. And he built these like incredible mental, he is so well read. It's absolutely staggering. And he built these incredible mental models. And A Brief History of Everything was the first book that I read by him. Again, I don't remember where I saw him. I think he was a kid at school or something. And it just blew me away. Like he was a guy who was taking psychology, biology, uh, Buddhism and
Yeah.
Eastern spirituality,
Gender studies,
environmentalism.
horticulture.
Yeah, and like putting them all into like some model that like seems kind of coherent.
Yeah.
And for my 21-year-old brain, that was just like the coolest thing ever.
I mean, if you open the cover of that, I think the opening image, right when you open it, is the gigantic kind of unified right there.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like, what is that?
The 4
thing?
quadrants.
There's this 4-quadrant model that's
Yeah.
so complicated to me.
It's so, man, I
can't believe you understood this when you're 20. I tried to read this, like, in the nights kind of leading up to this interview, and I'm
Yeah.
like,
no, it's not a casual
so
read.
complicated.
It's not a casual read. I nerded out. I just nerded out so hard to this. And I guess so to bring it to the personal significance to me, I never really, like I mentioned earlier, I never got into school.
Yeah.
Like never liked school. Was always bored, always reading my own shit. And Ken was very inspiring in 2 ways. One was it was the most challenging thing I had found that was, I guess, not school. Like generally it's
Right.
like if you ignored school, like I got into a lot of like Buddhism and stuff like that when I was a teenager. But other than that, it was like if you didn't read the stuff that you would read at school, like it was just all kind of like rock star biographies and shit like that. Ken was the first like super intellectual thing that kind of existed outside of what was conventionally accepted as, scholarship. So that was exciting to me. And then 2, it was he's an autodidact. Like
What's that mean?
Self-taught.
Oh, self-taught.
He's basically a guy who sat in a room for 20 years. Like he even jokes, I don't think it's in this book, but he jokes in one of his books that so he got married briefly, and he joked that moving in together was really easy because all he owned was 3,000 books and a typewriter. And so like that just, I love that. I was like,
Yeah.
I want to be that guy.
Right.
And just this idea, like he has these, fascinating, he'll take somebody like Descartes, some like old philosopher like Plato or Descartes or somebody like that, and he'll like have this beautiful summary of their philosophy, and then he'll show how that relates to like evolutionary psychology and like or the neuroscience that people are discovering at the time, and I was just like, man, that is so fucking
Well, just
cool.
even the leaps, right? To even just like, first of all, taking on, I mean, there's a tie to your work, like taking on gigantic, huge concepts that people can't even conceptualize. They're so gigantic and amorphous, and be like, you know what? I think I'll just take that on.
Yeah.
Like there's a confidence there, or some sort of bravado. Like, I can see that being appealing as a writer who ended up doing just that in your books.
Totally. I think I've always been very drawn to theories of everything, these huge models of that like explain everything.
Why?
I don't know. It's just my brain loves them.
Why though? Like what is it about that is it that you think it's a human instinct? Not saying that you're not human.
Yeah, right. I think a lot of people, I mean, I think a lot of people, I mean, I'm sure some people feel it more than others, but I definitely do think it's a human instinct, like finding coherence in everything, finding certainty in everything. To me, it's elegant, it's beautiful. It's like seeing, it's like this crazy diagram in the front of this book.
Yeah, if you could you just spend 10 seconds trying to at least, I know it's going to
Oh
be
my God.
Well, just because people can't see anything. I'm just
Sure.
looking at it from here. It looks insane to me.
So Ken's primary model, he calls it AQAL, which is AQAL, which stands for all quadrants, all lines. And basically he makes the argument, he's got these 4 quadrants, which basically, it's divided up, it's like 4 squares.
Yeah.
And it's divided up in 2 different ways. So one half is first person singular, and the other half is plural, or I guess pluralistic, and then the other division is between internal, external. So the top left quadrant is the internal individual quadrant, which is the internal subjective experience. So it's psychology, it's basic biology, sensation, things like that. Then the individual external quadrant is all of the things that you can observe, every individual object. So it's, you can measure how big this bed is, you can measure how high it is, the density of it, everything like that. It's the external qualities. And Ken argued that everything has an internal and an external experience. So he's one of these people, he argues that there's consciousness in everything. It's just that all that changes is the complexity of that consciousness. So there is a bed consciousness that the bed experiences itself, but then there's an external experience of the bed, which is it's soft, it's this height, it's this whatever. And then you have the plural side, which is the plural internal quadrant is the bottom left, and that is the interpersonal. So that's relationships, that's social order, that's culture, it's cultural norms. It's basically all of the things that we feel but are not defined internally. So language is part of that. And then you have the plural external quadrant, which is the bottom left, which is the, I guess, the shared, he calls it, I think, what is it? Exterior collective. But it's basically, it's systems. So it's like you and I are part of, if I was Canadian, we would say we are Canadians. Mm. We are North Americans.
Right.
We are writers. These are all groupings of objects that we all understand exist. So like economics falls in that quadrant. And what he points out is that there's kind of a symmetry to everything in all four. So everything can be experienced in all four quadrants. So something as simple as like this book, there's a individual exterior experience of it. It's paper, it weighs a certain amount, whatever. There's an internal experience of it, which I guess would be the actual meaning of the words inside it. Or actually, that'd probably be lower left. The book consciousness would be the upper left. And then the lower right is it's part of a system of publishing. It's part of a system of, whatever. So anyway, it's complex, but it's extremely elegant. Like once you kind of start understanding and looking at everything, it's beautiful. Unfortunately, I think it breaks down. Kind of like there's a lot of really good criticism of him online, but
including you. Did you know you're in his Wikipedia page?
Am I?
Yeah. So if you go to Ken Wilber's Wikipedia page, at the bottom under criticism, there's an article that you wrote.
Yeah, I did criticize
in the Wikipedia page entry, the rise and fall. So you've made it. You're part of his biography.
Oh man, I'm sorry, Ken.
No, it's
I would love to meet him. See, so this is part of the problem with him is that. So I mentioned earlier that I was really into self-help stuff, and I kind of saw what not to do. Like I saw very early on, like what I didn't want to be like a guru. I didn't want to be like Tony Robbins. I didn't want to like sell out arenas and make fucking $100 million. Like to me, the thing about self-development is that if people are not discovering the answer for themselves, then it's not worth anything. So it's like if I get up on a stage and I tell people, you just need to do X, Y, and Z, the fact that it came from me and not them makes it useless.
The empowerment aspect.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so even though it's very well intentioned, the guru model, I think it sabotages itself, because ultimately you've got thousands or millions of people that are coming to these gurus to solve their problems. And the fundamental problem in their life is that they've spent their whole life looking for somebody else to solve their problems.
Right.
And so I've tried to build my work around, I'm not here to give you answers. I'm here to give you the right questions. And so Ken, I feel like, fell into that trap. The dude is just smart. My God, he's so smart.
Can Could I just admit that I didn't understand anything about the 5-minute explanation of that model? Like, you did a better job than the book did, because because the book I thought was so hard to understand. But like, I just have to come clean. I'm like, it's so smart that I have no idea what he's talking about.
He's brilliant, but I think he made a decision in the late 90s, right around the time I got into him. He kind of blew up. Actually, Clinton and Gore were fans of his. And he kind of blew up around the year 2000, and he made a very conscious decision. Up to that point, he was like, no, I'm like, I'm a scholar and a monk. Like, he sat in his room with his 3,000 books and his typewriter, and that was it.
Yeah.
And he never did any interviews. He never did appearances. He never did anything. And then around the year 2000, he was like, okay, I'm going to try to like take this out into the world. And
certainly, in his defense, also had a lot of pressure to do so.
Oh, of course. Oh, I'm sure.
People are asking for it.
Oh, totally. And I imagine, I mean, celebrities started following, like getting into him, and people.
The president of the United States.
Yeah, probably, and probably a lot of people with a shitload of money who are like, hey man, let's start something. Like, I'll invest $5 million or whatever. Like, it's hard to say no to that. Right. And so he went for it, and I think it didn't go well. We'll just put it that way.
Well, in the show notes for this episode, I'm going to link to that article that you wrote. It's it's very thoughtful, it's very elegant, and it's very kind. I will say, you're not ripping the guy. Okay. You're thoughtful about where the slippages were from your perspective, but it does beg the question that I would ask, especially given the fact that I think you wrote that article before your book came out.
Way before.
3 million copies plus sold. #1 on Amazon for now multiple years. What are the slippages you're trying to beware of? What things are you telling yourself you aren't? What's on your not gonna do list?
It's a really good question. It's hard to know. So I've gotten, one thing I told my agent is I've been approached by a lot of television and movie people who want to basically buy the rights to the brand. And that's that, at least up until this point, I've told her, like, that's a road I don't want to go down. I feel like, I guess the line for me is what I just said earlier, kind of like the whole guru thing. Like, I think my larger mission is, and this was the mission that inspired writing Subtle Art, was like, I wanted to build a category of self-help that doesn't give you any answers.
Wow.
And so I think the minute I fall into that guy who's like on stage and he's like, oh, just do these 4 things and everything's gonna be great, sign up for my special VIP seminar, blah 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 blah. Like, that's what I'm
funnel marketing.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
like I think it's important to understand marketing, but I think there's a difference between understanding like why marketing models work and picking and choosing, things to help, and then just like diving headfirst into like, all right, let's cash in.
But why couldn't you do a TV show? Excuse me, just to challenge yourself, or challenge a bit. Like, why couldn't you do a TV show that was in line with your integrity and your?
I think theoretically I could. Let's just say that the people that have approached me are like
picturing the slick back hair and the pointy dress shoes, and they're like, "Yeah, I got $1 million for you." Okay, so you're saying it hasn't been in line with how you've wanted to take things. Yeah. I had this funny experience. This is maybe related or not. I got someone optioned. I don't think I've ever spoken publicly about this. Someone optioned my Book of Awesome to be a children's book. Mm-hmm. So I signed off on it. It was with William Morrison Dever, who was representing me. I signed the paperwork. And I don't know why I didn't even think about this, but I thought it was a children's book. Like, that's the end. That's all the paperwork said. And then they came up with their concept, and it was like a $6.99 paperback with stickers in the center, like doing crossword puzzles and coloring stuff in. And I was like, oh, I thought it was going to be like a breathtaking tour of like a picture book that was like going to guide people to meditate through like touching the world. I had a totally different vision.
Yeah.
And when I said to my agent I want to back out of the contract, she was really she was like, that's going to break this relationship with the publisher. It's a big name publisher. It's going to hurt the relationship here. You've already signed a contract. And I was like, you know what? I gotta do it. And so I canned it post contract and did my whole. This is like a fun, weird story, but like I did the whole children's book myself. Like I spent my own money to make it, and then I resold it to another imprint in the same publisher, and I released it. And it was the thing I wanted. It was turned never into a profitable thing.
Yeah.
But at least on my bookshelf, I have the children's book I always wanted to make.
Yeah.
And it's like it meant something to me.
Yeah.
And I've done projects, I've done books where I haven't felt as proud of them.
Yeah.
Because I got pressured to do like a third sequel of my first book, and it's like I got to get this out in 6 months, and it comes out and I'm like, I wish I had more time with this.
Yeah.
Yeah. You must feel that now with
this is
the book after.
That's the story of the last 18 months of my life. I mean, as soon as subtle art took off, it was, let's do subtle art for teens, subtle art for mothers, subtle art for teachers, subtle art
for the golfer soul.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I believe the exact words in my email to my agent was, I'm not going to be the chicken soup for the soul for fuck faces. It's just like, I'm not going to be that guy. I'm not going to be the fuck guy for the rest of my life. I'm young. I plan on writing books for multiple decades. I'm not going to like paint myself into a corner just because it's going to make me a crap load of money. So
with so much pressure, so much yelling in your ears, so much money, so much seduction, what tools or systems or guiding lights do you use to constantly recenter and reground yourself back to you?
I think one thing, and this kind of comes back to the, me being into Buddhism back when I got into Kin, I don't want many things. I don't, even before my book blew up, like my wife and we didn't know what to spend our money on, because we live pretty simply. And, I don't want a Ferrari. I don't want a collection of Rolex watches. I don't want $1,000 shoes. Like, I don't care. Like I've been wearing this hoodie for like 3 weeks straight.
You're wearing a gray hoodie that I don't see visible stains, but the point stands.
So it helps to not. I remind myself, I'm like, I don't need it, and to just stay with kind of like why I got into this. Why, what's the overall mission? I ran into this. I had a real so I'm doing Will Smith's book, and I ran into this with him. Like when they approached me and wanted to meet me, I was like, oh God, this is gonna be hard. This, like, I hope he's not a dick. I hope he's not a cheeseball, because this is gonna be really hard. And so I went in and like I was very specific with his team. I'm like, look, like, I don't need this. It needs to be the right fit for me too. I told him straight up, I was like, if he just wants a celebrity memoir, like, I'm not the guy. If he wants to do something, like I told him, I said, what excites me about this project is the idea, you have a guy whose life experience is probably one of the most unique life experiences in the history of the planet. I told him, I said, what excites me about that is being able to like dig into that, have that be my canvas to play with. And it was great when I met him. One of the first things they said is they're like, he was like, yeah, I don't want a memoir. He said, I want something like, he said, he calls it my philosophy. He's like, I want somebody to help me write like my philosophy. And I was like, hell yeah, now we're talking.
Because you are like I mean this with you are like a modern day philosopher.
Yeah.
No, like your stuff you read, the stuff you preach.
Yeah.
That's up your alley.
Yeah, totally. And it's like,
How lucky was that?
no,
You'd
it
be
was
like,
perfect.
I wanted it. Yeah.
It was perfect
yeah,
because
yeah.
it's, I mean, there are a lot of celebrities that want books out there, and it's, a lot of them don't, they basically, they want like a PR pamphlet, you know?
Extend the platform.
Exactly. The other thing I told Will is I was like, dude, the only way I'm doing this is if you talk about everything. Like it gets ugly, you know? Like we got to talk about the ugly stuff or else I'm out, you know? And he's like, yeah, I'm in.
Wow. You went Isaacson on him.
Yeah. basically, yeah.
You know,
So
that's amazing. Well, you know, what I love hearing about that is that you came in with your own thoughts first. I interviewed David Sedaris for this podcast, and I dug up this article that was written in like the early 90s by the New York Times. It was like his first book exploded, and like he was getting offers for like $20,000 a week TV jobs from like shows like Seinfeld, you
Wow.
know, like, and there was quotes in the New York Times articles about the producers, and he turned it down.
wow.
Right. Like, and this is a guy that had like no hits kind of
Yeah,
thing at the time,
yeah.
like maybe one hit, you know what I mean? And I'm like, how'd you turn that down? Like, how did you say no to like Larry Charles or whoever's coming at you? And he's like, I just knew what I wanted. I knew what I wanted before.
Yeah.
And it was similar to what you're saying. Like,
Yeah.
and that is a good reminder for me and hopefully the people listening that like, you got to coagulate internally first.
Totally.
Otherwise, someone else will stir you up.
Totally. I mean, for me, a big part of this too is I look for, you know, I take an approach, a very selfish approach with my writing, which is it needs to be interesting and challenging to me because it's, you know, people, this is one thing that people email me all the time. They're like, oh, well, you figured all this stuff out. Like, how do you live? How did you figure out how to live this way? And I'm like, no, the reason I wrote it is because I can't live this way. Like, you know, it's starting with my blog back like 8 years ago. Everything I write, it's not because I figured it out. It's because I still struggle with it.
Yeah.
Everything in subtle art, I still struggle with it. It's stuff that I'm still like trying to get a handle of.
It's your coagulation.
Yeah.
It's your solidifying of those values to yourself.
And the funny thing about me is that when I feel like I've got it figured out, it's boring and I don't want to do it anymore. And so, you know, for me, it's been, you know, my next book, it's going to be similar in style to subtle art, but it's going to be a much broader and different topic. And at first my publisher was disappointed about that. You know, they wanted a follow-up.
Yeah.
And I told them, I'm like, I'm sorry, but like
the subtler.
Yeah.
What is this? So how do you follow?
The subtler art of fewer fucks. But yeah, it's got to be challenging and interesting to me first. And then I trust that because that comes through from an author. Totally. Like
I'm so happy.
Yeah.
As a reader, because I don't know if I'll like your next book or not, but what I'll know is it'll be good.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I don't know if I'll like Beck's next album.
Sure.
But it'll be different.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll like Dave Eggers' next book, but he's going to follow Dave Eggers' heart.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And like, I so admire that because it means like you're going where you want to. And sometimes it's like, don't you hate when you follow an artist and like, you're like, there's that record they just did, and there it is again.
Yeah.
And there it is again. And first you're excited. You're like, yeah, the Strokes, like here's the second Strokes album. It's, yeah. And then it loses its luster because you're like, they didn't go somewhere.
Yeah. It becomes formulaic, and it's terrifying because on the one hand, it's funny, before we started recording, you mentioned the essay by David Foster Wallace.
I'm just going to use it as a transition, transitory device.
Sure. About the being pulled between commercial success and I guess artistic expression. And I actually wrote a piece for my site about this about a year ago. But I actually used like rock music as kind of an analogy for it, like looking at the different bands, because you have bands like, you know, bands like Aerosmith that clearly just mailed it in.
Yeah. And then they only play their hits from the 70s when you go on tour.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. They just keep cashing those checks.
Yeah.
And then you have other bands like Radiohead that is like, they put out an album and you're like, what the hell were they thinking?
Right. No guitars in this one.
Yeah.
You like guitars? No guitars.
No guitars. And so I wrote about that, about, you know, the how everybody kind of makes those different artistic decisions for themselves, and sometimes they get punished for it, like the different ways they get punished for it, and then the different ways they succeed for it. And so I found myself kind of struggling with that decision too. And I don't know if it's possible to really, like, I think the only people who like completely blow off the commercial thing are people like Kurt Cobain, who like actively like sabotage their own career
or stop doing it.
Yeah.
Like there's people like I'm gonna get these names wrong, but like isn't it like the guy Catch 22 or Catcher in the Rye?
Catcher in the Rye. He stopped.
Right. You
Salinger,
right? You kind of like
never
like,
wrote anything. Yeah.
Or Harper Lee.
Yeah.
Right. To Kill a Mockingbird. Like they only squeezed one out of her like on her deathbed, and like they grabbed some rough draft and like it's her second book, but she didn't write again. And like I in an earlier chapter of the show, I talked to a novelist named Ilan Mastai, who wrote one of my favorite books of the last year called All Our Wrong Todays. And he says, being a good writer is having a tooth that is going to fall out, but it hurts. And you play with it with your tongue until it stops hurting. And when it stops hurting, you stop. But until you can't stop playing with it, you keep producing.
Yeah.
So he's like, or he made the other metaphor. We kind of went deep in the metaphor. He's like, or it gets like infected, and you're like, it kind of takes you out.
Yeah.
But do you think I don't know, can you reach a place of satisfaction, of intellectual and philosophical like contentment with your background, with the amount of stuff you study, where you get to a place where you stop or you slow down or you don't want much, so you kind of just take the foot off the gas a bit, because you're an epic producer, man. Like you're producing articles every left, right, and center. I see new stuff from you. You got this book. You're working on the memoir for Will Smith. The non-memoir memoir.
Yeah, non-memoir.
You're epic. Like your output is staggering for someone who is kind of at inner peace.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because that's something I'm struggling with. I'm not at inner peace, first of all, but it's something that I'm struggling with, the output thing, because on the one hand, so there's another element to this kind of this tension with commercial success, and one of those elements is like, this doesn't come around. Like there's a very good chance that this is my one hit wonder or whatever. I mean, I'm sure people will read my stuff for a long time, but like in terms of like massive commercial success, statistically speaking, it's very, very likely that this is it.
Sequelitis.
Yeah.
You've heard that phrase in the publishing world. Yeah.
Yeah. And so a lot of these opportunities that come down the pipeline, it's like,
what if?
Well, this probably won't come around again. And I'm young. I don't have any kids. I've got a lot of energy. So it's like, fuck it. If this is the time to do it, if this is the time to just throw it out there and like say, all right, let's try it. See if it goes well. This is the time to do it. And I imagine as I get older, and I'm still a young and new author, so I imagine as I produce more stuff and take on more projects, I'm going to get jaded and cynical and start saying no to more things. But as it stands now, I'm kind of like, hell, man, strike while the iron's hot.
Well, and you know what you're reminding me of, which is why I just grabbed my phone, although it's incredibly rude. I did this because it's related to exactly what you're talking about. Steve Nash, basketball player, was just introduced to the Basketball Hall of Fame, and this is what he said on that exact thing. Can I just play this for you? Okay, I'm gonna play it right into the microphone. Just pull it up right now.
For all of the kids out there, just like these four, find something you love to do. Do it every day. Be obsessed. Balance can come later. Use your imagination. Put pen to paper. Declare your intentions. Set small goals. Knock them off, set more goals. Gain momentum. Build confidence. Grow a deep belief. Outwork people. Play the long game. You don't have to be the chosen one. The secret is to build a resolve and spirit to enjoy the plateaus, the times when it doesn't feel like you're improving and you question why you're doing this. If you're patient, the plateaus will become springboards. Finally, never stop striving, reaching for your goals until you get there. But the truth is, even when you get there, even when you get here, standing on this stage, it's the striving, fighting, pushing yourself to the limit every day that you'll miss and you'll long for. You'll never be more alive than when you give something everything you have.
Yep.
Thank you.
So true, man.
Isn't that epic?
Yeah.
I just Kyle Dubas is the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's the youngest general manager in hockey. He's like 32 or 33 years old.
Yeah.
He posted that on his Twitter, and I just listened to it. And the very last quote of like, finding something that challenges you and you strive for every day is like an incredible love. It's like
Totally.
it's deep.
Totally. It's funny. So I tell this, I don't think I've stated this explicitly, like publicly in an interview, but I've talked to a lot of friends about it. I was actually, when this thing blew up, I'm pointing at my own book. When my book blew up, it was like end of 2016, early 2017. It just took off. It was insane. It was selling like 40,000 copies a week or something just stupid. Like Harper would send me numbers and I'm like, okay.
Well, I know, yeah.
and it was actually like, so the first thing I did, because I had like a 2 or 3 year sprint leading up to it. The first thing I did, I was like, cool, I'm gonna play video games for like a month. And I did, and it was great. And I felt awesome. I'm like, hell yeah, this is the life. I'm like sitting around in sweatpants playing Zelda all day, and I'm like,
dump truck in the back in the driveway, and like dumping the royalty checks in.
Yeah. It's just like every week the numbers get bigger. And by the second or third month, I actually got really bummed out. And I think there was probably like a 4 to 6 month period. I was actually depressed. First time in probably 10 years. Because I think there are two reasons. One is exactly what Steve Nash said, which is there was no challenge. It was like whether I got up and wrote all day and like studied and worked on my business, worked on my website, or whether I got up and played Zelda all day, the result was exactly the same. And that like just crushed me. It just all motivation, which sucks to think about, but it, at the time I was like, oh shit, like was I really motivated by money? But it's not the money, it's the challenge. It's like it's having a mountain to climb. And then the other thing, it took me a long time to realize, and it wasn't until I was talking to another author friend of mine, who was like, I was kind of telling him this, and he's like, dude, what's wrong with you? Like, you've been on the Times list for 50 weeks, like, shut up. And I was like, no, like, and this is how I explained it to him, as I said, look, when I started writing, I had these dreams. I think, and they're dreams that every author has. You want to be a bestseller. You want to do a reading and have people come and sign their books and have them say all these great things. And you want to sell a bunch of copies and win an award and all this stuff. And I told him, I said, like, as authors, we have dreams about this stuff. And in my mind, it was like, okay, cool. Over the next 10, 20 years, I'm going to work my ass off. I'm going to write a ton of books. They're going to be great books. And one by one, I'm going to like check off all these dreams. And I knocked them all out in like 3 months. It was like 3 months. All your dreams are like, they're done. You're
you can't
done.
Even think of another dream.
You're done. Yeah. So
there's no other dreams left in the writing world. You hit all of them.
Yeah. So I sat around and I was like, well, what do I do? And I spent about a year not knowing what to do, not knowing what to work on. And meanwhile, the publishers yelling at me to do a follow-up or do a solo art for kids or whatever. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, why do that? Like, why do anything?
Yeah.
And so it took me about a year to find new challenges, and new topics that were like kind of exciting and invigorating for me, to get that sore tooth again, basically.
How did you do that?
I started reading again, and I started reading stuff that I never read before, which was the first domino. It was like I found a book that I had always kind of like vaguely in the back of my head was like, oh yeah, I want to read that one day. And I never bothered, never had time. It was a big book, of course. It was Reasons and Persons by Derek Parfit. It's a very thick, ornery piece of philosophy. And a couple friends of mine had like, were talking about it. And like, we got talking and we're like, hell, like, screw it. Let's read it. And I started reading it and it was so different and so weird and so like difficult and like totally unlike anything I bothered reading before. And I really got it. It just started spurring all these new ideas and new concepts and like making me want to play with like different perspectives and things like that. And it was great because it reminded me that like that's ultimately what I'm in love with is the ideas, is playing with ideas.
Wow.
And writing,
you found your why again, kind of thing.
Exactly. And writing is the byproduct of that. And you know, getting swept up in the massive success of subtle art and everything, and you know, traveling constantly and speaking and interviews and everything, like I kind of lost track of that. Like you get so caught up in the business side of things that like I had forgotten that.
You just gave us the perfect segue into your last
do
book.
it.
So before we hit record, you alluded to it already, and you know, for those people listening to this right now who have listened to chapter 1 of 3 books, you know that in that conversation in the basement with my wife Leslie, so my first guest was my wife Leslie, I said to her, I read this essay called "The Nature of the Fun" by David Foster Wallace. In it, he says that after commercial success, artists typically follow with seeking more commercial success. How can you not? You finally have an audience. You finally have people clapping. You finally have the thing you've always been chasing, which is someone to recognize and appreciate and love your work like you do. So you go down this path and it becomes stultifying and it becomes narrower. And only till you get to the end, you realize, oh shit, the thing that I loved at the beginning was actually that I had fun doing this thing. And so the theme of the essay, and I cannot do David Foster Wallace any justice, obviously, but it's find what's fun again. So it's a nice transition to your third and final book, in the magnum opus of Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. Did you want to overview this one? Because I have your write-up, or do you want me to give you like the back of the book thing to overview it for the listener?
I will selfishly say do my write-up.
Okay.
It's probably more fun.
Do you want to read it? Or
sure.
Okay, so here's Mark reading what Mark wrote
By
about
the way,
Infinite Jest.
I should just say that I probably shouldn't have been as I probably should have been much kinder to you and said like, this is water, or supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, or something like that. Because
I'm going to confess straight up. I got to like, I'm like, I have my bookmark still in my book. Okay, I have not hit the end of Infinite Jest, but although I started it years ago and did not like it, I've fallen into You're going to read it, so I don't want to ruin it.
Okay.
What you told me to do, I'm doing now, and I'm loving it. So
okay.
I'm going to finish this book.
Cool.
I'm not finished it yet.
So here's my summary, which I don't remember writing, but I'm sure I did.
Neil says you did.
I'm sure I did. In 40 years, when I'm old and crapping my pants, I will gather my grandchildren around the hearth and proudly tell them how their dear old granddad read Infinite Jest not once, but twice. Editor's note, I still haven't finished it the second time. Yup, that's right. Your dear old granddad was a total self-hating masochist. For whatever reason, when it came out in 1995, Infinite Jest became a cultural event. It was the massive book that was cool for all the Gen Xers to read. Wallace's book readings were overflowing with people, and he soon found himself invited onto major TV shows to be interviewed nationwide. This all made him uncomfortable, of course. Aside from his anxiety, his book was a parody of this exact facet of American culture, blindly pursuing the hot new thing, ignorant of any depth or meaning or significance. DFW once joked that everybody seemed to love his book, including the few people who had actually read it. Infinite Jest takes place in a fictional near future. The United States and Canada have merged. A cheesy singer is elected president, and there's so much pollution that giant catapults launch toxic garbage from New England into nearby Quebec. The story loosely revolves around a few plot lines: a child prodigy who studies at a tennis academy owned by his family, a recovering drug addict trying to make a clean life for himself, and a mysterious cartridge, simply referred to as the entertainment that is apparently so entertaining that anyone who views it will forego everything, eating, sleeping, pooping, just to keep watching it. I say the story is loose because really, there's not much of a story going on here. You're mostly reading this for hundreds of pages of Wallace's creativity and unique voice. Some people find this book tedious. The first time through, I did at times. But once you fall into this style, Wallace's unique ability to constantly observe life in ways you didn't know existed makes you feel as though you're getting smarter simply by reading him, even if it's a paragraph about something as mundane like tennis shoes and chewing tobacco.
That's beautiful. There, just so you know, although I clipped that for today, you had then below that had like key quotes from it. Kind of, I think here's you call them money quotes.
Yeah.
Here they are. These are the money quotes you pulled from the book, and then you had like kind of reasons to read it, reasons to not, kind of thing. So I just gave you that summary. So that's probably why it felt it ended on an abrupt note.
I actually don't have my. So one of my favorite quotes ever is actually from an Infinite Jest.
Oh, what is it? Is it this one? Is it the top one on this page? I think that I pulled that from another article you wrote about it.
Yes. You'll stop worrying what other people think when you realize how seldom they do.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Although, have you gone into like Quote Truth or whatever that website's called? Because apparently that is borrowed like 10 writers earlier.
Really?
Like he got it from somewhere who got it from somewhere who got it from somewhere. And it goes all the way back to like 200 or 300 years. It's like some. It's actually traced all the way back. So
it just
not to say that he didn't take it from. I'm not saying he took it. I'm just saying like.
Well, it just goes to show there are no new ideas. Like there really aren't.
Tell us about your relationship with this book.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just
you're reading
this one.
This
one's too good to not say. Everyone is identical in their secret, unspoken belief that way deep down they are different than everyone else.
That's a perfect paradox, kind of with what you just said.
I love paradox. I love pessimism.
There's a few more quotes. These are all good. These are all the top quotes on Goodreads. I'm feeding you now for those.
Oh my god!
I'm across the bed from Mark in this tiny hotel room here at the Drake Hotel in downtown Toronto, and I have printed off, of course, on Goodreads the top quotes. So I was like, so what else you got?
Giving me David Foster Wallace quotes is like giving a dog treats.
You're like totally distracted.
More.
Read a couple out to us. Which ones catch your eye?
I do things like get in a taxi and say the library and step on it.
That's great. And he does, he just can picture him doing that.
There's something so subtle about his tone that is just incredible. It did what all ads are supposed to do: create an anxiety relievable by purchase.
Yeah. It's because I feel like he loved and hated so many things.
Yes. Yeah.
What else you got? You got
let's
a couple.
See.
Mark's sitting in front of 3 pages of quotes from David Foster Wallace.
I don't even know what to do with myself. It's just heavy.
Well, those are yours to keep. It'll be my gift to you. But maybe we could how'd you get into what made you read this? When did you read it? Why? Tell us about your relationship with this book.
So
What's the story of it.
I discovered David Foster Wallace probably like 2000. It's funny because he died. Like I'm like an inverted hipster. I liked him after it was cool. He died in 2008 and I didn't hear about him until 2009, 2010. And I saw there was a clip of his commencement speech. This is Water was posted on another blog I read. And I was like, wow, that is like, it was like 2 paragraphs or something. It was the part about how there's no such thing as atheism because we all have to worship something. And like,
even if we worship the idea of not worshiping something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like those 2 paragraphs, I was just like, holy crap. Like, who is this guy? And so I went and I read the whole thing. To this day, This is Water. I should have been nice and given you This is Water. But that's like 10 pages, So I had to pick, I guess I had to be pretentious and pick the 1100 page behemoth. But yeah, that speech just blew me away. Just the simplicity and the wisdom behind it. So from there, I discovered his collection of So I Googled around and everybody was like, oh, you have to start with his nonfiction. His nonfiction's incredible. So I found his piece.
For those that don't know, this guy used to write articles for like New York Times Magazine, Paris Review, places like that. And so there's books that have collected all these essays.
Yeah, and it's funny how it started. So he has his first collection is called A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again. And it's about the time he went on a Carnival cruise to the Caribbean. And apparently the way it came about is like he was just this very like brooding, over analytical kind of like Eeyore type guy. And he was stuck. He was writing Infinite Jest and he was stuck. And his agent was like, I need to give him something to do. And so he contacted Harper Magazine and he was like, can you give, like, I have this brilliant writer. Can you give him an assignment? And the Harper editor was like, well, what? And the agent's just like, I don't know, send him on a cruise and trust me, you'll love what you get back. And so they sent him on a cruise and he came back with this like massive, like 50-page sprawling thing that is just like, it's this just acidic critique of American culture and consumerism and like compares the alignment of deck chairs to the geopolitical situation in Eastern Europe. Like it's just way out there.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. And then from there I found my way to Infinite Jest, which is his magnum opus.
Is that also the book, A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again, that has his insightful essay about the movie Terminator 2?
I don't think so.
Have you read that?
I think a long time
where he
ago.
talks about how it was like revolutionary that Arnold Schwarzenegger like was like demanded to be the good guy, not the bad guy.
Yeah.
And it changed his career and it changed how Hollywood actors dictated power and
Yeah.
all kinds of crazy. You're like from Terminator 2.
Yes.
Anyway, so then now you, sorry, I'm going on the side. Now, Infinite Jest, I'm stuck in the middle of it right now. You've completed it at least once and you're on your second go. Why should people read this book? What is it? What is it about this huge, crazy thing?
So the reason I gave it to you is, and I guess Infinite Jest is appropriate. My politeness aside, Infinite Jest made me want to be a writer. And
there we go.
Up until that point, I've been blogging, but ultimately I never had aspirations to be a writer when I was younger. I actually wanted to be a musician. And I started an online business and I started blogging and I started doing like marketing online and things like that. I read the Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek and I'm like, cool, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to build an online business. And then once I've got like
find my muse.
Yeah. And once I've got my easy passive money going, I'm going to start a band and like really do the music thing seriously. That was kind of always the plan in my head. Well, it turned out that I was kind of mediocre at marketing. I wasn't making a bunch of money. I was actually making very little money. And I hated it. Like I felt icky, when I had to like do cheesy stuff to make money. And one of the things that I did for my websites on the side was I started blogging, because back in like 2008, 2009, the way you got traffic to your site, like blogs were all the rage.
Yeah. That's when I had my blog.
Yeah.
I started it June 2008.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. I started mine somewhere around then too. And so it was just this side thing that I did for fun. And I was slowly discovering that I was a much better blogger than I was marketer. And so I was kind of in this weird transition of like, doing more blogging and focusing more on that and doing less marketing. And when I found David Foster Wallace, I think it was 2010, I read Infinite Jest.
And then you said come from the commencement speech to nonfiction, and then you take on the big one. And then what did it do? Yeah.
I was like, shit, I want to write stuff like this. Like I want to make, not like him. I don't want to necessarily like write exactly like him, but like the things that he was doing to my brain, like it's just, there's a weird joy reading him, even though he's like so kind of up his own ass with how smart he is. There's just this incredible humor and tone, and he just pulls from these like completely disparate ideas and things and puts them together.
Wilbur-esque.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, I never made that connection before. I'm sure there's an example in here somewhere of him just like connecting two crazy things that you'd never consider connected. Like getting in a taxi and saying to the library and step on it.
As simple as that.
Yeah. It's brilliant. And I never got into like I said, I wasn't in the school. So I never got into like the classic literature. I I never really, Hemingway and Fitzgerald, like I respected it a lot, but it never like lit me up,
Yeah.
and Wallace, the conversational tone, kind of the bro-y attitude.
Throughout the book, he randomly uses like acronyms,
Yes.
and then stops using them, and then starts using them, and then uses them with dots, and he never explains why.
Yeah.
And then in the book, there's like a footnote, and you're like, oh, it's like they're like introduce you to some movie director, and it's like, and his biography or his discography, whatever it's called, the filmography thing. So it has a footnote, and you cut to the back of the book, and this is a fiction book. It's like a 20-page essay
Footnote.
of like all the movies this guy. You're like, he made up all this stuff. Like, how did he make up a whole life's work of films for no point?
Yeah.
Like is the joke is that he's doing it.
Yes.
Like the joke is like, I remember Dave Eggers once describing McSweeney's his online publishing thing as humorous without being funny.
Yeah.
And I was like,
that's a good way to describe
I'm like,
him.
that's what he's doing. It's like the non-joke joke.
Yeah. And it's what's perfect about it too. So Infinite Jest, it's this, basically Wallace was very concerned about the obsession of entertainment in our culture. And this is pre-reality TV. This is
really pre-internet.
Internet, outrage, everything. And he was very concerned about how he saw the emerging economy and everything was very much revolving around what was the most attention getting, what was the most entertaining, and it scared the crap out of him. And so Infinite Jest was very much his kind of like dystopian future of a world that revolves around entertainment. And he's and the beautiful thing is that it's the format by which it's written. So like what you just described, like a 6-page footnote about a fake filmography. That's actually, like, if you actually go through the filmography, it's hilarious. It's absolutely absurd. It's like, some film is just like a naked woman behind a sheet filmed for like 20 minutes, it's just, that's the entire film. And it's putting all this superfluous, unnecessary information in for no other reason than the lulz. I think it was part of the point, and that
that the book would become the total pure entertainment that he's mocking.
Yes, and it's constantly, your attention is constantly being interrupted. So the footnotes cut you off, and you get into a footnote, and then you forget what the story was.
There's footnotes to footnotes.
Yeah, there's footnotes to footnotes, and then you go back to the story, and you don't remember what was happening, and then all of a sudden, it just like from one paragraph to the next, it cuts to a completely different character and setting with no explanation. And it feels like his point in writing that way was just like, we're becoming an ADD culture where it's just like, oh, look, this is shiny. Oh, look, that's shiny. And it's when you really do it takes 100 pages or so to like get on his wavelength. But once you get there, man, it's just visiting his brain.
It's unending in its joys that it delivers.
Yeah. It's just, his brain is just a crazy place to be. It's like a
Pee-wee's Playhouse.
For really smart people.
Yeah,
like,
totally, right?
Yeah.
But it's I remember when I threw it away in frustration the first time. So this is like flashback to me like 3-4 years ago. I remember saying to my wife Leslie in terms of like why you quit in that book, because I do quit books a lot. One of our values on 3 books is quit more to read more. We advocate quitting.
Yes.
We're pro quitting. But she's like, why are you quitting on page like 200? And I was like, I'll tell you why, Leslie. Because he just introduced a main character on page 200 that I've never met before. And I had to spend 20 minutes going flipping to see if I met this character before, and I just forgot. And I realized he's just screwing with me. Like, it's like, I was so mad.
Yeah.
But then, and you just mentioned this kind of this thing. I was going to ask you about this actually, Mark, because you and David Foster Wallace share like a financial kind of mathy background. Right?
Yeah.
Like he studied modal logic as an undergrad and wrote a book about the concept of infinity. Okay. He even said, so maybe him a little deeper than you on this topic, but he even said that the book structure of Infinite Jest is a Sierpinski gasket, Sierpinski, a Sierpinski gasket, which is a type of fractal. And he said about his own book structure, the chaos is more on the surface, the bones are beauty, or at least about this fractal.
Yeah.
And as I understand, Mark, you've got this degree in finance. I think you briefly worked as an investment banker. Tie this together for me a bit. What's this connection between math or logic and your other books as well and like writing? Like, what is the tie
I have no
here?
idea.
Yeah, but there's something connecting the tissue here.
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, I was always very interested in, math and politics and finance and probabilities and statistics, and I was really into chess and gotten poker, card games. I don't know, like it's just my mind. To me, stuff like that's fun. Like finding the relationships and the proportionalities between things. There's, kind of what I described about. I find Wilbur to be beautiful. Like it's funny because I feel like most people who would read Wilbur would feel like it's more he's like trying to make an academic argument. I feel like Wilbur's more, it's beautiful to me. It's not right.
It's like a theorem.
Yeah, there's
or proof or something.
There's once you understand what he's talking about, there's holes all over the place. But it's beautiful. It's elegant.
How are you defining beauty there and elegance? What is it
it's
about
it? It's the structure and the order that's put together. And
Interesting.
so I guess, with Wallace, it's probably what Wallace sees in Infinite Jest himself. Like it's the structure. I mean, I don't think that translates as much to my own work. I think I'm much more focused on simplification than either of these guys are.
Complication.
Well, the thing too that I've noticed, so the first draft of Subtle Art was way more complicated and academic, and
interesting.
And people hated it. Everybody I showed to was like, "Dude, what are you doing? Like, where's your voice?" And so then I simplified it, and then people were like, there it is, and they loved it.
Wow.
So it's,
thank goodness you got that feedback.
Yeah,
that's pretty rare to get because you didn't publish it anywhere.
No.
So this just came from, I'm assuming, like your wife and editor kind of thing.
Yeah, my editor, my agent, and then I've got a couple guys who work on my website, and I showed it to them, and they were just like, I've got one guy in particular who's worked with me he basically kind of runs my website. He's worked for me since 2012. So he and I have, speaking of trust, he and I have a lot of trust. And he actually, it was coincidence, he actually happened to be in town the week after I sent it to him. And so he actually met up with me in person, and he was like, "I'm really sorry, but it's awful."
No way.
He's like, "I've read you since you started. Like, this is terrible." He didn't say terrible, but like,
thank goodness.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
like, amazing that you have that kind of trust with people that work with you. Like, that's also just pretty. I mean, my background's in leadership development at Walmart. I think that's really hard to get.
Yeah,
especially upwards in a hierarchy, of any form.
Yeah,
you were the writer. It's markmanson.net.
Yeah, and
he's speaking truth to power.
Yeah, I mean, you
should give that guy a raise.
Oh, I did. Don't worry, I did.
Sorry, didn't mean to throw that on air.
Yeah,
we no longer talk to each other.
Yeah, like you're fired. But yeah, it's weird because I love complex philosophical stuff, and I write pretty simply. I think I kind of write. Actually, a reader said this to me recently, and it was like one of those compliments. Like you get compliments from readers, and like some of them you're like, "Oh, thanks."
Backhanded compliments?
No. Like some of them they just kind of bounce off you.
Yeah.
And you're like, "Oh, hey, thanks, that's great." And then, but sometimes the best compliments are when readers see the book the way you see it,
or even tell you something that you didn't even know was in there that you then are like,
yeah.
Like, so what was the compliment?
So the compliment, and this was pretty recent, a reader was like, said that like your works are like icebergs. Like the book itself is the piece on the surface. And he said, he's like, I can tell that there's so much research, like you're so well read and there's so much research There's so much study that like went into the ideas, but then it's like it comes off.
You
There's like
just showed the tip of the iceberg.
yeah, and it's like you elegantly explain it in like with like a joke about pandas,
Mhm.
and they're like they really admired that, and like that was like the compliment
Yeah.
that got me tearing up, and I'm like, oh, he gets me.
Well, and
you know?
don't I know you're doing a little bit of a blushing thing right now. I know we can afford to be indulgent on this podcast. We're talking to Mark Manson. You've sold 3 million. You've sold more copies of books than David Foster Wallace, and it's because your stuff is so accessible. There was
Yeah.
a story a few years ago where I don't know how this came about. I heard this secondhand, but like somebody came across Bruce Springsteen's iPod like a pool at like a Four Seasons.
Oh yeah.
And this person did something that you should not do, which is like upload the playlist to the internet or like or take a photo of what he's listening to, or
That's amazing.
something like total like privacy
Yeah.
violation,
Yeah.
And apparently, and I think a buddy of mine told me this, who is a huge Springsteen fan. Like
Yeah.
he's an aficionado, seen him live a bunch of times. Flew to New York for the live Broadway thing he's done, and he said the pushback on what he was listening to was astonishing because he was listening to very weird, artsy, complex music that
Interesting.
no one had heard of. We all thought he'd be listening to like American pop or rock or like
Yeah.
the stuff he makes.
Yeah.
But actually, his inspirations go to places that he's
That's-
distilling from.
That's so interesting. Yeah. It's funny because I ran into the reverse of that. So like I like jazz a lot, particularly like fusion. And one of my favorite jazz guitarists, I actually had a chance. This is a nice thing about being a fan of jazz is that nobody likes jazz. So when you go see the show, there's like you could just hang out in the bar and like you'll end up meeting the band. So I was hanging out and one of my favorite jazz guitarists was there, and I just walked up and I'm like, hey man, been listening to you for a long time. And like he's an incredible musician.
Yeah.
Incredible. And the same kind of thing happened, but in the reverse direction. Like he's so sophisticated musically. And then it just I don't remember how, I wasn't like prying or anything, but it just kind of randomly came up. I was like, oh yeah, like so what kind of stuff do you listen to? Like what are you really into? And he's like, he just started laughing. He's like, man, people are horrified when he's like, I like shit like Bieber, Justin Timberlake. He's like, if you looked at my iPhone right now, it's like it's probably like, the chain smokers or something.
Wow. It's not even top 40, it's like top 10.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. And he was just like, yeah, it's amazing how they like put so much into just 3 notes.
Wow.
Like
Interesting.
he was super inspired by that.
Well, this is art inspiring art, and this is there are no new ideas. This is what follows great work, and like how, what do you draw on, and where does it come from, and like this is interesting. Like we're in the pond of it, and I love that you've let us in through this conversation. To close this thing off, this has been an epic conversation. We have gotten into so many themes. I'm so grateful, Mark. Honestly, you've let us go into a lot of these places, nooks and crannies that have come from the books. You're an incredibly successful writer. Could you close off by just offering us a piece or two of hard fought lesson or wisdom that you've learned on the journey you've been on so far?
Sure.
Anything that someone listening would sort of gain from your sort of hard lesson
about
being a writer, being out there, producing. Like the question I wrote here on my piece of paper was, what are 1 or 2 pieces of final advice you'd share for aspiring writers? I usually ask it to like the profession, like I had people on that might be in design. So I asked them for how can we get better in design? For you, I'm asking writing.
Yeah.
But it could also be around reading if you wanted, or.
Well, I really like your advice to people of like quit books. I have a rule, which is, I don't use Kindles anymore, but, I'll look at like the page count. Like, so let's say it's 350 pages. I give it I give it 10%.
Wow.
So I give it to page 35 to grab me. And if it hasn't grabbed me, I drop it.
Wow.
And the same thing too. It's like, if you're reading like especially nonfiction, if you're reading a chapter and you just don't care about that chapter, skip it. Go to the next chapter.
Mhm.
Or sometimes I'll open a table of contents and I'll be like, okay, out of these 12 chapters, I only find these 3 interesting. And I'll just read those 3 and then I put the book away. People get like they feel guilty that they're not like going from page 1 to
Because we were taught that in school, right?
Yeah, right.
Like book report, you got to read
Yeah.
it. It's cheating. You're using the Cliff's notes.
Yeah, or if like if the author starts repeating themselves, which they do all the time, nonfiction they do all the time. The author starts repeating themselves, just skip the paragraph.
Plus, sometimes, as Seth Godin says, you get the joke.
Yeah,
Like there's one idea on page 250. That's the new idea, and like all you're doing is hunting it like a truffle smelling pig. Just like putting your face in the book till you find the one thing. You're like, okay, I get that, and and so I hear you.
In terms of writing, the thing that I see writing very much kind of as like almost a bizarre form of meditation. So since writing is similar to meditation, you're left alone with your thoughts and nothing but your thoughts. There's nobody else. There's nobody like you can't wait for validation from anybody. It's just you and your thoughts for hours and hours and hours at a time. And I think, when I used to meditate a lot and I was really into that stuff, one thing that teachers used to say is they would, whatever arises, you just keep going. If you're really sad and upset, just keep sitting. If you're joyous, grateful, just keep sitting. And writing is very much the same thing. You're going to show up. It takes years to write a book. And some days you're going to show up and you're like, my God, I'm so stupid. Nobody's going to read this. This is awful. I'm a failure, blah, blah, blah. And you just got to keep showing up. Other days you're going to show up and you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm a genius. Like, this is going to change the world. Nobody's thought of this before. And you just got to keep showing up because both are not true. Both are just things in your head. And so it's like the Sedaris thing. It's a muscle. Like you just got to keep showing up, and it let all of the thoughts and judgments just let them happen. Let the hamster run on its wheel. Just keep showing up, keep writing.
Mark, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey everybody, it's just me. It's just Neil again. And wow is a word I would use to describe that conversation with the very, very intelligent and very generous Mark Manson. So many quotes pop out to me from this show. 3 of the ones I'll leave with you are his view on profanity was so interesting. He says, the purpose of profanity is to put a fence around words. Those words are evil. We take this basket of words that we all decide as a culture are bad and shameful things. And as side effect is that those words grab attention much more than anything else. They kind of shock you. Just like a really interesting way that like people think this guy is just a potty mouth, but it's really scientifically kind of calculated to pull you in certain parts in certain ways and get you to be shocked so you can pay attention to it. I thought that was fascinating. And then here we go, a couple more. I didn't want to be like Tony Robbins and sell at arenas and make a fucking $100 million. To me, the thing about self-development is that if people are not discovering the answers for themselves, then it's not worth anything. If I get up on a stage and say, you got to do X, Y, and Z, or Z, the fact that it came from me makes it worthless. Even though it's well-intentioned, the guru model sabotages itself, but the fundamental problem is that these people have spent their entire life looking for someone to follow. By the way, did you know how I said Z or Z there? I told my wife, Leslie, that I got that letter, from the person out in Victoria, BC, on chapter 27, and she's like, I totally agree with that person. You should stop saying Z. And I'm like, I'm a Z guy. I know I'm Canadian, but I just like Z better. Z sounds better at the end of the alphabet song. She's like, yeah, I hear you, Neil, but you got to go with Z. Anyway, I've got an internal dilemma happening inside me right now, and it has not sorted itself out between Z or Z. I think I still kind of lean towards Z. Anyway, happy for you to weigh in. And my third quote from Mark is this last one. I love this one. And it was nice of him to go into the depression kind of he had after the popularity of the subtle art, kind of how he spent a month playing video games, how he kind of saw that for what it was and sat himself out of it. But here's the quote. Ultimately, what I love is playing with ideas, and writing is just a byproduct of that. Getting caught up in the success and business side of the subtle art made me lose track of that for a while. And I can totally relate to this, not because I've sold as many books as Mark, but just because, of course, commercial success distracts you. And that's a really big part of the reason why I'm doing 3 books. You may remember, if you've listened all the way back to chapter 1, that in the basement with my wife, Leslie, I talk a lot about this essay called The Nature of the Fun by, of course, David Foster Wallace, who we just spent a lot of time talking about. And I told Mark and I ended up chatting after this podcast was recorded, and I ended up sending him that essay, or I think maybe he found it on his own. And he wrote me a note afterwards saying, thanks so much for this essay. It totally resonates with me. The Nature of the Fun by David Foster Wallace says that after you've had commercial success, you're thrilled. You finally are selling the art that you've been making. You finally have validation. You finally have followers and fans and readers. So what do? You follow it up with another hit or another thing that you think will be commercially successful. As a result, you become myopic. You become oriented towards the business side of things. You lose track of the art and of the fun that you were having in the first place. 3 books is my attempt to just have fun. I don't care about the ads. Part of the reason I don't have ads is because I want to be trusted. The other part of the reason I don't have ads is because I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to deal with emails, and I don't want to be recording things about sweat whisking underwear. I don't care, and I don't want to care. And so one way to do that is just to make sure it's always for fun. Always, always, always for fun. When you've got my promise and my pledge that for 15 straight years on the exact minute of every single new moon and full moon, we will have fun on this show together. Huge, huge thanks for Mark Manson for giving us number 921, Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand, number 920, A Brief History of Everything by Ken Wilber, and number 919, The Infinite Jest, just Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. Those 3 books will be added to our top 1,000, which is viewable anytime at 3books.co/the top 1,000. Thank you so much for listening to chapter 28 of 3 books. And now, are you still here? Did you go away? Did you turn the podcast off? Are you over listening to something else now? No, you're still here. And if you are still here, I'd like to welcome you back to the end of the podcast club. This is the club where I talk directly to you, you talk directly to me, we play your voicemails, we read your letters, and we have a little interactive banter at the end of every show. So with that, let's go to the phones. As you know, call me up anytime at 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Who's on the phones this time?
Hi, Neil. This is Caitlin Uross from Calgary, Alberta calling. The kids are finally in bed, and I have a moment to myself, so I thought I would just call and tell you how much I'm enjoying how personal and easygoing this podcast is. I really do feel as though I'm sitting right beside you, and quite frankly, sometimes even say things out loud. So it's like I'm actually actively participating in the conversation. The podcast is interesting, it's funny, and I'm really learning a lot. I always look forward to the next chapter. So thank you very much, and have a great night.
Thank you so much to Caitlin from Calgary. By the way, I love alliterative people. Do you know what I mean? Like Caitlin from Calgary is alliterative. I'm Neil from Toronto. It doesn't have as much of a ring to it. I wish it was Neil from New York. Neil from Naples. Neil from Nanaimo, BC. Are you alliterative where you live? Are you Bob from Boise? Are you Mark from Memphis? Give me a call if you are I like people that are alliterative. Their name starts with the same sound as the place they're from. Okay, that's just a random side note. But Caitlin, I appreciate the call. And thanks so much for saying that you kind of talk along with the podcast. I've had a lot of people mentioning that lately, and I wanted to give you guys a quick update, and that I have changed the 2-ear listening format again back to wide. What does that mean? It means when we first started the show, I always have recorded every single chapter of 3 books in a 2-ear format, which means I come out of one ear or one side of your car stereo or whatever of your headphones, and the guest comes out of the other. And my idea and thinking was that you, the listener, will feel like you're in the middle of us. You feel like a conversation. I think of you as part of the conversation, so let's make that sound come to life. You're chilling on the couch with us, or you're hanging out in the hotel room with Mark and I. You're on the bed in between us, right? In this case. That sounded funny, but you know what I mean. And after a lot of people wrote in and said, that sounds so weird and bad and take it out, I changed it from kind of 100% left ear, 100% right ear to 50-50. And now I've kind of tweaked it back. So the last 2 or 3 chapters you might have noticed, we're back to kind of wide. We're not as wide as we were at the beginning, but I think we've found a healthy balance. I really cling to these quotes where people say like, the greatest minds are willing to change and stuff like that because I'm changing all the time. And in this case, I think we have found a balance. We're in chapter 28, so hopefully I figured it out by now, but we do have over 300 chapters to go. And for the remaining 305 chapters, let's see if this type of balance works. Well, let me know if it does or doesn't. Okay? Okay, now it is time for the letter of the chapter. And as with every letter that I read on the air, remember, if it's a letter from you, and it could come in the form of an iTunes review, in the form of a YouTube comment, in the form of a tweet, in the form of an email to me, then just reach out to us, and we would love to mail you a signed copy of any of my books. You pick the book, Book of Awesome, Book of Even More Awesome, a journal, 2-Minute Mornings, Happiness Equation, whatever, and we drop that in the mail no matter where you live in the world and send it to you free of charge. It's just our way of saying thanks so much for communicating into our show. And so this chapter's letter comes from Karen, who sent me a few pictures. It says, Neil, look at this rack of books I just saw in Malaprop's bookstore in Asheville a few minutes ago. Have you seen this in other bookstores? It was new to me. They have all these books wrapped up in brown paper with descriptions on the end of it, but you don't know what book you're getting. What a great idea. And so there's this picture. It's a really interesting picture. And the headline on the shelf in this bookstore, Malaprop's bookstore in Asheville, is called Blind Date with a Bookseller. It's their favorite books from the booksellers who work on the store. And it's wrapped in brown paper, so you don't know what book it is. But outside there is a description, which is really interesting. So, for example, I'm like zooming into the picture of one here for a second. There's a brown paper wrapped book, and it just says, splendid pieces, calm, lucid prose, thought-provoking, explorations of power and colonialism, speculative fiction. Now, would you buy that? I mean, that's a $15 or $18 book. You don't know what book it is, but you're getting a date with the bookseller. Here's another one. It says, this is a different brown paper package. Hugely entertaining, dissects social norms to reveal the truths of human nature underneath an NPR and New Yorker Best of the Year, a modern take on a beloved classic, stylish and witty. $17. You don't know what the book is. You just know what it's about. And you know what? There's something cool about that, right? Because it kind of goes back to chapter 27 a little bit with Robin Goodfellow when he was talking about people think they want a gin and tonic, but they don't even know why, right? He talked about how he asked people, do you want a drink that's cozy like a fireplace or tropical like a beach? Do you want a book that, or do you want a drink that you order with adjectives, kind of like these books are? Or do you want a drink? I'm saying book and drink interchangeably here. Do you want a drink that's like makes you feel a certain way or gets you to a certain place? So maybe that's what these books are doing too. I once went to a restaurant where on the wine menu they didn't say like Pinot Noir from Oregon. It just said a fruity red that has a lot of earthy tones and is perfect with pasta. And like literally that's all it said. It didn't say the varietal. It didn't say where it's from. It just gave you the description. And the thinking there is we're using the wrong reference point. We're judging books by their covers. In order to get underneath the surface, in a way, sometimes you need to cover the cover up completely and just tell us about what's inside. Karen, thank you so much for telling me about this interesting topic. Malaprop's bookstore, big props to you. By the way, what is a malaprop?
Malaprop.
Malaprop is the mistaken use of a word in a place of similar sounding one, often with unintentionally amusing effect, as in dance a flamingo instead of a flamenco. Can't say I knew what that was, but now I do. Oh, here's another one. Yogi Berra, the famous baseball player, once said, Texas has a lot of electrical votes rather than electoral votes. Okay, Malaprop. Good name for a bookstore down in Asheville. Where is Asheville, by the way? Oh my gosh, how embarrassing. I have no idea where Asheville is. North Carolina. I should have known it's in North Carolina. Because Karen is also from North Carolina. Thank you, Karen, for sending in that letter. Okay, and now it's time of the word. It's time of the word. It's time for the word of the chapter. Mark Manson. Where do you go with Mark Manson? The guy, what is the word that Mark is most famous for using?
Fuck your trauma. Fuck my trauma. So fuck it. No. Fuck your trauma. Man, that is so fucking cool. I'm not going to be the chicken soup for the soul for fuck faces. Not going to be the fuck guy. The subtler art of fewer fucks.
Yes, of course, it is. Fuck. How could you not go with that word when we're talking about Mark Manson? This guy is known, despite his best intentions, as putting the F word on the cover of books kind of for the first time and really kind of opening it up. So now when you walk by an airport bookstore, how many books have the F word on the cover? I mean, it's literally the top 5 or top 10 on the bestseller list. Everyone's copying him, but this guy came up with it first. But like, do you really know where that word came from? How is it pronounced?
Fuck.
Does sound kind of funny from the dictionary lady. F-U-C-K. It is vulgar slang. Number 1, it means have sexual intercourse with. Or number 2, ruin or damage something. That's not really good enough. Wikipedia, what do you think? Well, it's considered an obscene English language word, often referring to the act of sexual intercourse, but also commonly used as an intensifier or to note disdain. While its origin is obscure, it is usually considered to be first used around 1475. And then it has all kinds of different descriptions and false etymologies and band names and brand names and censorship. So if you want an interesting read, check out F-U-C-K on Wikipedia, okay? But that's not good enough. Like really, where did this word come from? And so I found this amazing blog post I want to quote a little bit for you now. The blog post is called So Long As It's Words, and we're going to link to this. All she does is talk about different words. And so on February 12, 2014, a woman by the name of Kate Wiles posted a blog post called On the Origin of Fuck. I'm going to read you a couple paragraphs. One origin story for fuck is that it comes from when sex was outlawed unless it was permitted explicitly by the king. So people who were legally banging had fornication under consent of the king on their doors, or F-U-C-K. But obviously that's wrong, as are all the other nonsensical acronyms floating around about anything. There are so many apocryphal histories of this word, fuck. So then she goes into detail. Instances of fuck before the 15th century are rare. Despite it commonly being classed as one of the Anglo-Saxon four-letter words, Jesse Slidehauer, who's the author of an entire book on the history of fuck and past editor of the OED, suspects it actually came into English in the 15th century from something like Low German, Frisian, or Dutch. While fuck existed in English before then, it was never used to mean having sex. Instead, it typically meant to strike, which was, way back when, related to the word that became fuck because it is a kind of hitting. Anything that appears earlier is most likely to be the use of the word to strike. If you want to talk about making whoopee in a dirty way, the Middle English word for that was swive, S-W-I-V-E. Turns out it's related to the modern English word swivel, as in to go swivel. Okay, you guys can use your imagination there. Another reason for why there's hardly any written record of the word fuck before the 15th century is because if it was around before then, it was just too darn rude to write down. The coded examples above might have been early ways around writing it. There's also theories that its late arrival is borrowing from the Norse, the Vikings, because several early instances are found in Scottish writing. However, this is generally believed to be unlikely, in part because the Scottish weren't considered influential enough for the English to borrow words from. There is so much going on in this word. As Mark talked about, what's the point of swear words? Well, we fence in words. We fenced in words in our language so that when we point at them and we use them, we actually attract attention. Well, you guys know from listening to 28 chapters of this show, or whatever ones you have cherry-picked or enjoyed so far, hopefully enjoyed, that I don't use that much swearing. I don't swear a ton. I used to swear a lot in my writing back when I was in my 20s. And when I kind of got into my late 20s and 30s, I just thought it was more challenging to not swear. I thought it would be more interesting to draw attention with other language. At the same time, on this show, I don't censor guests. So you may remember in chapter 3, Seth Goins like, can I swear? And I said, yeah. And then he used a couple quotes from the Book of Est. I want the swearing, if it comes up naturally, to just color in a story or to be used as part of someone's reference point or the way someone talks. I want interesting people, interesting voices, interesting places, and maybe swearing is part of some of those conversations, and maybe it's not part of others. And that's totally fine. This is an unfiltered, uncensored look at the biggest themes that are affecting us in the world today, and we get there through books. Just like Mark says how the writing is a byproduct of what he's really interested in, which is wrestling and playing with kind of tough, big ideas. The books are, in a way, just a launching pad or a byproduct of what I'm really interested in doing with all of you, which is tackling the world's biggest, toughest themes about how we live our best lives through just simply conversations with interesting people. Thank you so much for listening to Chapter 28, and until next time, remember that you are what you eat, and you most certainly are what you read. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you soon.